your subconscious is picking up on certain things. And if you're kind of in tune to that because you're paying attention to the game, that's when you're going to really be able to excel. Like at a tournament series, everything else in my routine goes in favor of sleep. It's super important for poker. And the more I learn about strategy, like it's all about pre-flop.
Today on the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast, I have for you Dr. Lara Eisenberg. Not only is she a medical doctor, she's also a WSOP gold bracelet winner who's racked up about $1 million in lifetime poker cashes. She recently, a couple of years ago, had a cash for $500,000. In today's conversation, we're going to talk about how she goes about studying poker and learning. Despite a very hectic and busy schedule, she, spoiler alert, gets in about 15 hours per week, what she spends her time on, what her process is, how she sets herself up for poker success while she's traveling by optimizing her sleep routine. All in all, wide-ranging conversation with one of my favorite people in the poker space. Without any further ado, I bring to you the one and only Dr. Lara Eisenberg. Lara, it's been a long time. It's great to have you back. How you been?
Been great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, This is my pleasure. I was, doing some research, and last time you were on, you had just won a WSOP bracelet. And then a short while after that, you got second in a tournament for close to $500,000. So yeah, let's just kind of talk about the success from a few years ago. Let's kind of start there on how did it feel to have that giant score and after winning your gold bracelet.
Thanks. Yeah, it felt great. You have to run really well to make it deep in a huge field tournament like that, but it felt very validating. Obviously winning a bracelet was amazing, but I also wanted to have a big score, or at least, a deep run in a open tournament as well. That wasn't, just a woman, all women or all seniors, or that's just an absolute open tournament. So that was very validating, having the win score, and it was a funny thing because I fired 5 bullets, almost didn't fire the last bullet because they undershot the number of dealers and tables the first go around for the WPT. So the line to get in at the very last minute late reg, which is what it ended up being, it was going to be like a minimum hour and a half wait to get in at the very close of registration. So I was like, this is kind of dumb, and then I was like, well, whatever. I just throw in another 1,100 and go to dinner, and did just that, and came back and got in with like 17 or 16 big blinds or something, and managed to just keep grinding. So it was really cool. Ended up in even having to call all in for my tournament life on the bubble of that tournament against a very good player. So there were some exciting moments before getting to the final table, and that was it was really crazy, but very, very validating. And it felt like the training that I've gotten with BBZ poker and the coaches definitely paid off.
Tell me about that. The BBZ poker training for somebody that's maybe considering getting into tournaments or trying to find different training sites. Like what is it about BBZ that appeals to you specifically?
So I had been with Ape Styles from back in like 2017, I think, or earlier even, maybe. I don't remember exactly, but for a while, I'd been very fortunate that there had been this group called Elevate that Rob Tinian started as like a subgroup of his site, and it was going to be like catering to a smaller group of very dedicated players, and it was before there were as many training sites like that out there, and it was like $297 a month, which was outrageous or whatever at the time. And it ended up being like a very small handful of us, and with Ape being the main coach, which was just amazing. And so that was how I got connected with him. And so we would have like a couple of seminars a week, and he would just go for like 3 hours and stuff because he just loves the game so much that he just kind of can't help himself, and he just keeps teaching. And he was even doing things like live streaming 25Ks with us with no delay.
Oh, wow.
Watching, which was pretty insane. But the group was, it would be just 3 or 4 of us hanging out and stuff. So it was really neat. That's before he was a big streamer. And then when that Elevate went away, he got into BBZ, and he had known Jordan before, so we all migrated over to BBZ, and it's been great. I mean, to me, Jordan Drummond explains poker better than anyone. He can really get to the core of being able to, especially like explaining, kind of understanding and being able to simplify strategies. He's just incredible at it. So that was very, very helpful. And Yargo, who's in BBZ, is an ICM specialist, and his seminars, just kind of having that hammered in, week after week is really incredibly helpful. And he was very helpful to me at the WPT. When I made the final table, there was a week delay. So I actually had to go home, work for a few days, and then fly back to Vegas. And, so did some coaching hours with him, and he ran some custom sims, and we drilled, all that for the final table to start with, which was awesome. And as being in a group of people is really having that kind of support, in general, whether it's on Discord and sharing hands, or like my poker friend Pat, who's been with me since the beginning, and we've been helping each other all along. He was super helpful to me too at that final table, like kind of just going over, and talking about initial strategies and things like that. And he was there, railing me and helping, in between when we were on breaks, as my wife was there as well. But he was watching the live stream, and then, chatting with me about kind of what he was seeing and stuff. And so that was just super helpful. So but BBC Poker in general as a site, I think it's more advanced, so it's not like for people who are just starting out and wanting to learn about tournaments, I don't think. I mean, you could, but you'd have a lot of kind of catching up to do. It's really more, intermediate and advanced strategies. So some of the people who are coaches on other sites are in BBZ, and participating in the seminars, not as coaches.
Sure.
And that gives an idea. Right, exactly. And so it's just, it's collaborative, and I know with my current work, I'm not able to be on a lot of the seminars live, which is ideal to be on lives, because there's a lot of interaction. Like Jordan will be very Socratic, and asking questions, and you type your answers, and he doesn't really care what your answers are, but just committing and, having to think through and put on paper your thoughts is very helpful in remembering things. But I watch all of them eventually. And, after the WPT win, I did cut back on my regular work, and I'm planning on cutting back further in April, as well. So that was something that came out of that was also very helpful.
Sure. How much are you cutting back in April?
Right now, I've actually managed to work out a situation where I can commit to just helping out one weekend morning a month, and then working another like 30 hours during the month, kind of whenever I want. Mm-hmm. So then I can what I wanted to be able to do is just sort of plan the rest of my life, and then fill in work where it fills in. So I'm either going to do that or just retire, one or the other. I haven't fully decided, but getting a little bit older, so time to start thinking about the later plans.
Yeah. So $295 sounds like a pretty good deal to me. Sounds like a steal.
That was, but BBZ monthly is only $60 a month.
Sure. Yeah.
So, now I think just things got so competitive with so many different sites out there, that prices for everything are more reasonable.
Yeah, it's always been interesting to me, the pricing of poker training material and the overall benefit of poker training material at the end of the day. It's always seemed to me like just a bargain, like no matter what. I mean, I've bought so many different things that I've never used, or that I've tried to use, and I've realized that I needed an engineering degree to actually figure out how to use it, and then I threw it away. But like even with that sort of thing, like the things that work, the things that you find that you try and actually like work really, really well, if you're putting in a decent amount of volume, tend to just be exponentially worth whatever you pay for them, just hundreds and hundreds of times worth whatever you pay. And so in that way, I think that, like, again, like for the listener, trying out different things, trying out different training material and different sites and different platforms to find the one that resonates with you, so that you find the one that gives you 100x return, should be the plan. And, I run a community, so I know that there are a lot of fence sitters who kind of sit on the fence and never actually pull the trigger with really any kind of training material because they're frankly afraid. They don't want to invest into something that they don't use and don't get their money's worth in it. And I see that, and I've been that way in other areas of my life. But I think in poker, just try. It doesn't have to be like a giant investment, but I do think that investing in your poker education, if you plan on taking this seriously, is extremely, extremely important. And, when you were just talking about your story of playing, going deep in the WPT, having that rail, having that support, having the people who are invested in you. I mean, it's really hard to put a price tag on that sort of thing. And
I agree with you 100% on that. It's like, to me, one of my bigger, I kind of like, I have to have everything, like I want all the poker materials.
Sure.
So I end up over investing in stuff as well. So, sometimes with stuff I don't use, but more often, like, even if you don't end up using whatever it is, HRC, as much as you think you might have used it, like, to me, these are just basic tools of the trade. If you're going to be, doing things, like when I think back on earlier in my poker career, when I would feel more stress or anxiety at the table than I do now, a lot of that comes from not having the knowledge, not knowing what to do in certain spots, and when you don't know what to do pre-flop, that's a lot of the time that you're stressed, and so, and the more I learn about strategy, like, it's all about pre-flop, it's all about knowing your pre-flop ranges. And then, once you understand that really, really deeply, then you'll understand how to play post flop as well. Like, you can't at least understand post flop without really deeply understanding your pre flop stuff, and that's why I think it's important to have to be studying like strategy and learning new things, but it's also, I think, important to be drilling and paving knowledge that it's not like you haven't heard of it before, but you don't have it pushed to unconscious competence. And so I divide my study time between watching seminars and trying to learn new concepts and setting up drills that are based on, so if I do a database review with Ape Styles or with Jordan, all those identified leaks, I turn them into Poker Academy or GTO Wizard drills. And then those are things that I drill every day, until those are plugged. And I think that's kind of how you want to go about it, is a very strategic and purposeful way of practicing to get those things down. And to do that, you have to have the tools. You have to be a member of Poker Academy and GTO Wizard, and have HRC and things where you can upload your hands into and all that stuff. So, but that it pays for itself, as you said, like 10 or 100 times over.
And the final ingredient, right, is that like you've got to do the work. You just buying a thing is not good enough. Having a thing is not good enough. You actually have to do the work as well, which is honestly, I think it's one of the things that folks kind of forget to do is like if you talk to somebody, they realize that preflop is very, very important. But if you ask them like how much energy have you spent into playing preflop exceptionally well, generally it's very minimal, right? Because I think that street tends to be thought of as like the basic street, like the very basic street, and it gets overlooked and just undervalued. And then they move on to like the more advanced things where it
doesn't feel as sexy. Yeah,
it's not sexy. It's definitely not sexy being really good at preflop and understanding how preflop works. But when you're trying to figure out like, oh, do I get donks on this turn? Like, what size should I use on this flop for my C bet? Or you get into like a weird type of situation, like understanding the hands that your opponent has in their range, because the hands you have in your range, the hands they have in their range, and then being able to discern like, oh, I have an advantage here. I have an advantage on this turn card, being the out of position caller. Now I get to lead because this card hits me a lot more than it hits them. Just these things, like, they stem from knowing your pre-flop range. They stem from understanding the shape of your range in that moment. And that's what really determines whether or not you get to place an aggressive bet, or whether or not, you have to, you expect big bets or just whatever. Like, it sets everything up. And yeah, just for the listener, please just trust me in this one thing. If there's anything that you trust me, study pre-flop, hammer it until the cows come home, make it be like the layup drills when you're preparing for a basketball game, like just the fundamental thing that you study all the time, because it's really, 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 really important.
Yep. Yeah. And what I do, like with Poker Academy, I think I really like the way that their ranges are displayed. So I'll just have it broken down that Monday I'm studying chip EV symmetric ranges, and I'm going through and doing, raise first ends versus raise first ends, three bets versus three bets, and I have a series of those. So it's like 120 hands, and then Tuesday is asymmetric chip EV, and then this percent left symmetric, this percent left asymmetric. So there's something for each, day of the week to go through so that you're, seeing different things, and then you can, track your progress, or, at least to keep continually exposing yourself. But Jordan is really, really good in that regard too, of helping you kind of understand how to learn your ranges really well, understanding where the perimeter of the ranges are, so that you understand kind of the worst hands. If you understand the worst hands, that offsuit hands that you're opening, well, then you're opening all the stuff better than that too, and that kind of thing. And it just, it helps to solidify it. But yeah, I think all that stuff is really important.
And you mentioned kind of like a study path that you go through yourself. How do you go about putting that together? Is it just through the database analysis? Outside of having a database analysis, how do you determine like what your focus is for the upcoming week?
Sure. So so for me, my play volume has not been high, so it takes me a while to accumulate enough online hands to make it worthwhile doing another database review. But obviously anytime I play a session, I'm marking hands and looking, at those spots and seeing if there's any trends of areas that I need to study. But I think it's most efficient to accumulate a bunch of hands, get a database review with an excellent coach, and then take those spots and then just create drills around those spots, and it's not as much about, so I'll create those same drills in GTO Wizard or in Poker Academy, whichever one, drill those things every day until I see that leak is improved. And that's, it's pretty much as simple as that. But then it's just doing that every day. Yeah.
When you do the follow-ups database analysis with Ape or whomever, is that one of the things that you guys check, is the kind of progress from the one before until now, the leak that you guys reviewed and found, and then how you're attacking that and how you're doing comparatively?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's something that like I should be bringing to the table, I mean, I should just be saying, here's where we were, last time. These were the leaks we identified. Here's where I'm at now, and now, I'm not folding as much to, out of positions, double barrels. And you can see that that's in line with where the stats should be, and, we have, Ape Styles will give us something that's showing basically about what your percentages should be for every stat that all the major stats that you look at. And then you can just see, nobody's check raising enough and nobody's three betting enough, just boom, nobody is. But then you can at least look and see where you're making progress, and you can look, if you're good with PT4, you can look and see, like, are you, you think that you're opening everything correctly? Are you opening all of the bottom perimeter hands from the button? Maybe, are you opening 50%? And if not, why? And look and see the times that you're folding those, is it because, there's whatever, it's on the bubble, or there's certain reasons, actually for it, or are you just missing opens? So I think that's probably the most valuable part of studying, because at a certain point in time, the new stuff ends up becoming less and less common, and you should be spending most of your time studying things like button versus big blind and, cut off open button calls, like some of the things that have just come up a ton, and, defending the blinds versus opens and that kind of stuff. So, when you're at a point where you're looking at, three betting, EP versus under the gun, stuff, you're looking at stuff that's not coming up a ton.
Yeah, it's going to happen like just very, very rarely, because
Yeah.
he opens very rarely, and then you get a hand that you can actually 3-bet versus them very, very rarely, and then they call somewhat rarely after that. So like just getting a sample is quite difficult, which kind of brings me to my next question. Since you've played lower volume online due to having a busy life and a career and all of these sorts of things, how granular are you going with the data analysis and leak resolution? Just because I know how long it takes, right, to get enough data to actually go like granular, like, just breaking it up into board types, ace high, king high, queen jack high, 10-9 high, facing a spectrum of flop c-bet sizes, right? That takes like a long time to see what your actual response is to a high degree of certainty, just due to sample size issues.
Right. Yeah. And so it's not, for me, what I've, for now, while I have another job, I have a busy life.
Sure.
My, I focus my study on the leaks that are being identified. And then I'm getting a lot of the rest of that information, I think, by watching and learning from seminars and other materials that I'm learning, more than I am, trying to dig down into how I'm doing on, very specific board types and things like that, until it gets to that point. Like, I think my leaks right now are big enough that I know I don't need to be like out there looking for the most esoteric things of all,
Sure.
And, and I think that the other piece of the puzzle is that people I think, greatly underestimate the mental game aspect of things, as well as like all of the other non-strategic aspects of things, and the impact that has on your actual performance, in game. Because, I think you can get to a reasonably high level of competence in the game, and then there's obviously, I'm going to be playing against people who are more skilled than I am, for sure, and the higher the buy-in, in general, probably the more that it will be accentuated. So how do I try to narrow the gap between myself and a more skilled person or in that field? Well, I can either try to do a better job of taking advantage of the lesser skilled people at the table than those guys are, but at least I need to have in control the things that I have the most control of, and so, and I found that that's been very beneficial. I have a mental game coach. I've worked with Elliot Rowe and with Stephen Baker, who's part of Elliot Rowe's group, and that's been super, beneficial. And I think having a really good, daily routine, both around tournament series and then outside of tournament series, so that you've optimized diet, sleep, physical fitness, all of those other things. Like, everyone will tell you, oh, they think mental game is 80% of it. But then you say, well, how much time do you spend optimizing, mental game and these other things? Like, well, not a ton, and I think that that's a big mistake, because I think that that's where, like, I've had more success than I probably should have for the amount of time I have to dedicate to the game, I guess. And I think some of that's just probably just flat out luck. And then, some of it is at least optimizing those things that I can control, because regardless of having another job and other things, they benefit everything else in your life too. And so there's no reason not to, and
Sure.
I skimped on things like sleep for like my whole life as a doc, and it's been later in life that I've realized the importance of it. And I think it's super important for poker, to the point that, like, at a tournament series, like, everything else in my routine goes in favor of sleep.
And sleep is the one thing that's like exceptionally hard at tournament series to get, just due to the nature of like when the tournament starts, when the tournament ends, when the restart is. Typically, like, I'm, I recently just turned 40. I'm going to bed much earlier now than historically, right? Like at 10 p.m., I'm pretty much knocked out. But if I play a tournament, that's not going to be the case. I'm going to stay awake for, at least until 1 a.m. or so. But also, because I don't play a lot of tournaments, having that wind down period where, you're just full of adrenaline, you're full of energy, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, shoot, I'm 3 hours past my bedtime. I need to start winding down and going to sleep. And it just doesn't happen instantly. It just takes time to kind of wind down. It makes me interested in, your your specific protocols for these kind of tournaments and these trips. Like, if you could be, as specific as possible, that'd be great.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things that's really challenging around, especially tournament series, is, like you're playing in a day one, the day one may go, maybe it's going to play down to the money, as some of them do, so you don't really know when it's going to end. It's not a set number of levels, especially if it's a lower buy-in, and so, it could be 10 o'clock at night, and you also may be short. So you may be going home in 10 minutes, or you may be going home in 4 hours. You don't know. And so it makes it really hard if you want to try to do things like titrate caffeine and when you're going to stop with things like that.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that, I pretty much don't, for a while, I was just keep doing things like drinking green tea throughout, so it's like a low level of caffeine, because I'm not that caffeine sensitive. And I think that that can be reasonable depending on how caffeine sensitive you are. But otherwise, I think it's better to figure out other ways to stimulate yourself and try to stay focused and in flow. I think it's really important around on a dinner break, what you eat, and how much you eat, so that you don't end up, I think it's kind of common sense, but you don't end up eating some like huge, greasy, heavy, meal and then going back to the table and being surprised that you're sleepy and tired. You want to have something that's got enough protein to keep you full for a while, and some carbs to give you energy. But not like, sugary desserts and things like that that are going to spike you and make you crash. And so I'll keep, snacks that are, have reasonably complex carbs and some fats and stuff in them, so I can just keep having some snacks throughout the day and stuff. And then, when the time comes and you end up either busting out or you make it late, or worst case is you end up like going really, really late and then you bust out. So you're going to re-enter again the next day and be back at 10:30 or whatever time, which is always fun.
Yeah.
I will always stay at or close to the venue, so that I can be up and in bed immediately, or nearby, near immediately. And then using MP3s, like Elliot Rowe has cool down MP3s. And, I've trained myself using one of his in particular. His voice is very, very soothing, so that after a tournament, I get in bed and I listen to that. And that means you're going to sleep, and if you just kind of do something like that over and over again, whatever that routine is. You can also use melatonin, and in a pinch, I think getting back to your room, immediately taking 5 milligrams of melatonin. I never go to a tournament series without clothespins, because if you're in a hotel room, you want to be able to take the curtain and wrap it up and clothespin it so you don't get any light in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I always bring earplugs. I have a really good brand of earplugs that are nice and soft, a really good eye mask, so you can just basically shut everything out and give yourself the best chance of, being able to sleep as long as you can. And then you just have to set your alarm on like super loud, so it actually wakes you up in the morning. But I think like those kind of things, so that you don't leave anything to chance, because you can end up in a hotel room with people partying big time next door, or, whatever it is, or one where there's just bad light in the room that comes in early and stuff. And so, those things are pretty important. Like when I go to Vegas, I always just buy a cheap humidifier, put it in the room so that I don't end up with my nose all dried out, making it hard to sleep. It's like, you can start to think of like a million little tweaks that individually, like I travel with an AeroPress coffee maker, so that in the morning, because now it's like the hotels will never have a coffee maker in the room because they want you to go wander around the casino trying to find coffee. So I bring my own collapsible hot water thing, so that it turns into a kettle, make my own hot water, AeroPress my own coffee that I bring, and I've got, coffee and whatever in the room immediately. And you can have everything there set up so that, like you just don't want to have to think about anything. So when I get back to the room, and I'm still kind of winding down, I've set out an outfit for the next day. I've packed my lunch for the next day. I've got my coffee set up, to, maybe take a melatonin, whatever, and then get in bed MP3. And you just have the same routine that you do every time, and that helps.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's the accumulation of small edges, just accumulating as many little small edges as you possibly can that, add up. And that just sounds like an incredible routine and ritual for going to sleep. And, if you're more well rested than your opponents, then you start out with a natural edge. And that's just how it is. I think that Dara O'Kearney, who's been on the podcast many times. He is like an ultra marathon runner and just like runs like crazy, like 100 miles and things of that nature. And it just kind of struck me, like his endurance level is probably off the charts. And so like at the end of the day, when everybody else is kind of sluggish and dragging, he's probably going to have a pretty big edge over his competitors just due to the fact that like he's an endurance athlete, right? Not something that, he's studied in GTO Wizard, not anything off the table, but it's something that is an edge, a quantifiable edge that's off the table. And yeah, I think that all of those types of things tend to be very undervalued by most poker players in general. Like just, it's really incredible the amount of, and again, I play very few tournaments and I've mentioned it before, but it's very incredible to me how at 8 p.m. I see guys like chugging Red Bulls at just deeper in a tournament. And I'm like, how on earth does this like work for you? Like, how does it make sense? And I think it doesn't really work. That's the reality is like, if they make it to the next day, then they're probably just all out of sorts and not going to sleep well. And it's just going to wreak havoc on just their cognition, their energy levels the next day. It's not a good setup.
I mean, I think if it's your last tournament, like if that's it, and you're playing down to the winner, and
sure,
you want to use stimulants and you want to use like whatever I'm not like illegal things, but just whatever,
right?
Then yeah, have at it, right? And I mean, we've all played tournaments that end at 4 or 6 a.m. or whatever like that, and you just got to do whatever you got to do, and then you chug coffee and you do whatever. Some people like nicotine gum. Actually as a stimulant, which I've never tried, but
if it's all or nothing, that's one thing.
Yeah, but if it's a series, then you need to, be able to, you're in it for a longer plan, for sure. Yeah. And so I think that it's absolutely true. The physical fitness aspect of it, and also training your focus. So I meditate every day, and I think especially the way that people are trending now, like with Twitter, and then now with TikTok and things like that, like people's attention spans are so limited, and I see people and they just can't resist like being on their phones, playing on their phones. They're not paying attention, and they get into a spot with somebody who literally hasn't played a hand in an hour, but they have no idea because they've just been watching movies on their iPad, and they end up like 3-bet getting it in against this guy. We're all just like, this is aces and nothing else, because we've been watching, and that kind of stuff is, being able to just sit and focus. And the other thing is, if you're really immersed in the game, it's the only way you're going to get into flow. And when you're in a flow state while playing, that's when you're most likely to be able to pick up on these subconscious clues, that you get, and so if you're actively looking for tells and observing people's behavior, even things that you're not absorbing, your subconscious is picking up on certain things. And if you're kind of in tune to that because you're paying attention to the game and you're not distracting yourself back and forth with other things, that's when you're going to really be able to excel. Because I think that there's a ton of information available live that just isn't available online. And the best live players are taking advantage of that for sure.
Tell me about being in a flow state, trusting your subconscious at the poker table. What does that look like? And how are you? Yeah, I mean, just what does it look like? And then what level of trust do you have when you're in that kind of state to kind of trust yourself to do something that like, oh, this is not something I would normally do, but it feels right. And so I'm just going to go with it.
Yeah, it's funny. I think you do need to have enough experience, to be able to accurately have, a feeling, or a subconscious, feel for something and have a decent chance of being accurate.
Sure.
I think
it's based on something. It's not magic.
Right. Yeah, it's not. But I think, when you're in a flow state with any sport or anything that you're in, you are, you're basically not overthinking things. You're a little, you're not as frontal lobe focused, and you're in a state where you feel that your level of skill matches, or slightly exceeds the environment that you're in. and, you know, information comes more easily to you, decisions come more easily. And I think most people can relate to having been in a flow state, and you can be in a flow state for, and that's like Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is the person who did a lot of the work around flow. And, you can be working as a janitor and be in a flow state, and cleaning things up. Like you can be in a flow state in virtually anything that you do. But I do think it's important to try to be in a flow state while playing, if you can be, which generally comes first of all from paying attention and immersing yourself in the game and not being distracted. But then as far as trusting your instincts around things, I've definitely made pretty exploitative in my mind decisions, sometimes based on things that I could explain to somebody, saying, certain ways that maybe it was their pre-flop routine or things that they did or things that they've said in a hand or things like that are, much more tells based things. But other times, you just have a feeling about something and you're not 100% sure why. No, will I let that make me make a very huge deviation from what I think is the right play? Mostly not, I would say, but I think there's definitely times where that the right play for your hand is mixed. Sometimes you're going to three bet it, sometimes you're going to, just call or whatever in a situation. So what tips the scales there? Well, you can randomize it, but usually there's going to be some data, based on either the person's play or the sense that you get of them in this particular spot, and that's typically what I'm doing rather than just completely randomizing based on suits or clock or things like that. Like I feel like I can do better than making it completely random. Now, if I'm against one of the top players in the whole world, am I going to, have some huge insight on them? Probably not. And then I'm going to, probably do it based on one of the ways that I randomize. So.
Yeah, I would say almost always there's some kind of data point that you can prioritize to tip the scale in one way or the other. Like almost always. It's another thing that, I've recently learned about, not everybody in the super high roller tournaments, the 100K buy-ins are randomizing at a high frequency. They're a lot of the players are not randomizing at all because they believe that, one data point tips the scales to make something either a pure three bet, a pure call, pure fold, just whatever mix it's supposed to be theoretically. And in my experience in cash games that are just more static, the strategies tend to be more static than tournaments due to the blinds staying the same, and you tend to have 100 big blinds versus everybody else. So you see a lot of the same situations kind of again and again and again and again. Even in cash games, we don't train our players to randomize. They really never randomize almost any decision against regs, or white belts, and it's just because there's something that the population does or doesn't do. As you mentioned, right? Like people don't check raise enough, people don't three bet enough. Well, that's going to have a dramatic impact on your four bet frequency. That's going to have a dramatic impact into your call, bet, three bet, and fold frequencies after you see bet and get check raise.
Absolutely.
And
it would be suicidal to do anything different. I mean, it makes no sense. And like one of our coaches, Brian in BBZ, talks about LogicNet, which is his basically phrase for mentally node locking something, and that's exactly what you're talking about, And so I think the best players are really, really good at being able to, sure, they understand GTO and they understand what a solver would do playing against another perfect robot that also knows its exact strategy, which is never the case. And instead, I think playing GTO informed poker that you put a logic net around knowing population tendencies. And if nothing else, even if you don't know anything about somebody, you still know what they look like if you're playing live. Some of the things that they've done. But if the first hand you played against them and they look like an absolutely average person that you haven't seen, there's still population tendencies for the stakes that you're playing. And that's better than complete randomness. I think as far as subtle shifts in strategy, it doesn't mean you change something to a 100% this or that most of the time, but
the way I think about it is strategies on a dial. And if somebody c-bets more than they should, so they crank the dial up, that's going to change the response. And if they c-bet way less often than they should, then that's going to change how you respond to A, when they c-bet, and then B, when they check behind. But you really need to understand what the strategic shift is as the dial goes up and as the dial goes back. And then that's kind of how you can mentally node lock a situation based on your observation and know what the response is, right? Because like, it's not enough to know that somebody's underdoing something. You need to know what you do when somebody underdoes something or overdoes something in one way or the other, like what the optimal counter is. And I think that's really where kind of the magic happens for playing poker at a high level, where it's like, oh, this hand went to showdown. They took this line. They should never take this line with that exact hand. They bet too big on the flop. So if they bet too big on the flop with that hand, then they're overusing their big bet. They're big betting too many hands. So if they're big betting too many hands, what should my response be? Should I check raise more? Should I call more? Like how do I maximally exploit that mistake? And then just thinking about like the entire game tree in that way, where it's like, oh, players under 3-bet. So now when they do 3-bet, I can't use the GTO Wizard output response. I need to realize that the dial's been dialed back because they underdo it. So now what do I do, right?
Exactly.
And
I think Andy Brokos's books are really good as far as that goes. Just talking about, giving a lot of different examples of, and Dara's as well. With his GTO poker things, helping people put it in concrete terms of these are the mistakes that are being made. Now, what's the GTO strategy? What's the mistake this player is making? What's my deviation, and how severe should that deviation be?
And sometimes it's hilarious that even like GTO Wizard or a solver, when you can use the AI to kind of node lock and see what you should do based on, different frequencies and different range makeups, etc. But like, it's still going to solve for every single turn card. And so like the maximal exploit may not be what the flop output tells you is after you node lock it, because it's still playing the turn in the river perfectly, which in the case of somebody making a big mistake on the flop, almost certainly they're not playing the turn in river correctly either. And so it becomes this kind of fun game of trying to figure out like, okay, so like if this is their holistic strategy, where's the maximal exploit point? Where can we take advantage of it the most? And that's like, it's really difficult to find and figure out, even with the tools that we currently have. Like very, very, very difficult to figure out exactly where the maximum point where you can exploit them is.
Yeah. And also I think a lot of people don't realize that actual node locking is really, really hard to do, because the solver, as soon as you lock one response, the solver goes, oh, well, we're going to make up for that on the turn, and we're going to just start blasting at the turn or whatever, or we're never going to bet the turn, and so you have to be willing to do it over multiple streets. A lot of times, I think it just ends up being reasonable to just think and use your brain.
Yes.
And go, like if they're not 3-betting enough, we can think about what that would be. It's not rocket science in some respects. How severe the response is might be surprising, but it also may not be accurate, because somebody is making one type of mistake on the flop doesn't mean that they're going to continue to make similar mistakes on the turn and river. When the bets get bigger, they may play differently than the solver would in a similar circumstance too.
Yeah, somebody could massively overbluff the flop and then massively underbluff the river. That's like,
they just start shutting it all down.
It's very, very, very common. So, all right, we nerded out a little bit in the poker strategy side. So in our list of things to talk about, one of the things is maintaining drive between big scores. Tell me how you deal with, just keeping the drive, keeping the will to keep redging and battling during these dry spells.
Yeah, I think it can be challenging, especially if you're allowing yourself to be too results focused. I think that's where not being a full-time player is helpful. When you're not having to pay the bills with what you're doing, you don't end up in situations where, having months of, variance that are negative really impacts you. So if it isn't impacting you, then you aren't going to be as stressed about it. But not allowing yourself to be mentally impacted is not always easy. But I think it's really important. Like I try to view downswings as an opportunity to just really deep dive into my own database and leaks and figure out, like what am I doing wrong? I mean, because no matter what, like whether you're actually doing things that are wrong that are causing the downswing, which anybody who's played around on prime dope knows that you're going to have, variance and swings.
Sure.
But you're still screwing things up anyway, whether that's the reason for your downswing or it isn't. So why not just assume that there's something going on that you can address? Because there is, for sure. And then just say, okay, this is my time to, focus in, drill down, and fix some leaks. And let's look at what those things are. And then, being sure that you're still being bankroll, smart for whatever your own bankroll situation is. But I try really hard in going to tournaments to not be focused on, how big of a score, how deep of a run as the defining thing of whether or not that was a successful day. Because that's really not a good approach if you're going to play tournament poker. I think if you're playing cash, you're going to, have a positive day more often than not, a lot of the time, compared to tournament poker. I mean, more than half.
Often than tournament poker, for sure.
Right. I mean, more than half the time you're going to have overall
Sure.
a positive day. Certainly not true in tournament poker. Now, if you're playing a huge enough volume day to day, that may be different, but still, you're going to still brick, 80 or 85% of the time. And so if that defines your success, you're going to be unhappy 80 or 85% of them. That sucks. So, instead I try to set like a mental game goal, a strategic goal, and then, and then maybe, one other goal that's more set around, following my process of, maximizing efficiency on breaks or things like that, and so defining my success on whether or not I executed on those things, whatever those goals were for the session, that helps a lot, and then, a lot of times too, just looking at your own database and realizing that, hey, you know what, your BB per 100 is still high. So, if your BB per 100 in tournament is 8, but you've just been, you haven't been running deep, and you've just ended up, you're running bad at the wrong times, that kind of stuff too, that's going to hurt, but at least, you're in general making, positive decisions. That helps mentally. But it's definitely, it's part of it. And so, talking with other people, and owning it, because it's something people don't like really want to talk about a lot. I think is like, hey, I've been on downswing, and nobody like really wants to sit and talk about it. It's like talking about your bad beats. Nobody is really that interested. But I think that supporting each other, with your poker friends in that way around downswings is easier than just like listening to bad beat stories, which is just kind of pointless.
Well, that's where community and support also comes into play too, where like my players, if they're struggling, then it's like, hey, let's fire up your database, let's see what's going on, let's look at the core nodes and see how you're doing in 3-bet pots out of position PFR, 2-bet pots in position PFR, out of position pots, 2-bet pots PFC, which is typically big blind defense. How are you doing in these core nodes? And going through, looking at it from a macro level, and then looking at it from a micro level, and being able to determine, like these are some like easy things that you can clean up, or B, like, you're just playing well, and you're just whenever you have a top 3% hand, your opponent has a top 1% hand, and that's happened 5 times in a row. And what can you do? Like, you're just going to get stacked every single time. And realizing that like you're playing well, keep up what you're doing, don't change anything, because I think that on your own, it's so easy to change things. It's so easy to quote unquote fix things that aren't actually broken, which breaks things even more and causes just chaos. And results to go bad. So yeah, having a mentor, having a group to give you feedback as to like, I'm struggling, I'm in a downswing, like, am I still playing well though? Like, like, can somebody who isn't really biased and as emotionally invested into this data set, just give me some feedback? And I've just find that it's super helpful for my guys, because, either A, they get something very clear that they need to work on, Or B, it's like, yeah, just take a breath and keep to the process and keep going, and it will turn around. I promise you that it will. There's a lot of comfort in that, because I think that's the big thing that hurts people in downswings, is that feeling of kind of despair that it's never going to turn around and that you're a failure and that you can't, you're doing everything wrong. I think that's what causes a lot of the pain.
Yeah, I think that certainly the pain of losing is a lot worse than the joy of winning is, and that's definitely part of it. But I think, and I agree, I think that if people get into this defeatist attitude, like, oh, every time they have to go on, oh, I always lose my flips and blah blah blah, that kind of stuff. But I think
Tell me,
embracing that.
tell me
Sorry, go
when
ahead.
you hear somebody that you're playing against say that at the poker table, how do you feel as it relates to like your
I feel
prospects
great when I
of
hear
beating
people
them?
like that. Yeah,
No.
and it's like I know that they're not in a good headspace.
They're toast.
Um,
They're
yeah,
they're pre-defeated.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and there's certainly people who will take advantage of that. As soon as they see somebody who they think, has a chink in their armor or has exposed their Achilles heel, then they'll just hammer on them. And I try not to be like rude or aggressive or anything at the table, but people make themselves targets. And I think that speaks as well to things like body language at the table when you're playing live poker. When you see people and they're slumped over, and they're like whatever, they're tired and they're bored, you make yourself a mark, because you don't look like a threat. And it sounds silly, like it shouldn't matter, your cards are your cards, blah blah blah, but it does matter. When you see somebody who's sitting up, who's engaged, who's active in the game, and you're thinking about a light open and they're staring you in the face, instead you may not open that hand, and when you're somebody who is seen as somebody who is going to be annoying to play against and difficult to play against, who's going to three bet you a lot, who's going to make your life difficult, who's going to float and do all these things, and when you're playing weakly because of a downswing and WEAK, you're tending not to do those things because you feel like things aren't working out for you, and so you're not as, some people may be overly aggressive. People react to downswings differently, where some people, are tightening up everything and afraid to take chances, and other people are trying to figure out some way to change something, and are going out of their way to be either overly aggressive or overly splashy or loose, or, you really don't want to do much to deviate from what you normally do, as to your point.
Yeah.
But I think your body presence at the table, and how you carry yourself and how you think of yourself, is really, important. You need to always be walking in to any tournament, thinking you're going to crush it, and you're going to be, if whatever happens with the tournament and happens with the day, you're going to be difficult to play against.
Yeah.
You're going to be somebody who people aren't thrilled to see sit down, especially on their left, and you're going to be a problem. And you can be a problem whether or not you end up cashing the tournament, you don't end up cashing the tournament.
Sure.
You just want to, you want to walk away and feel like you've played, and executed to the best of your ability.
Yeah. And, you were talking about flow state earlier, and, confidence and lack of confidence is tangible. You can feel when somebody has a lack of confidence, and you can feel when somebody's more confident, and it's very difficult, I would say probably impossible, to get into a flow state when you lack self-belief and you lack confidence in yourself.
Agree.
You just can't, you can't get there. You can't reach that heightened level of awareness where you're kind of playing above the rim. So yeah, that's something that it's such an easy like mindset. Actually, it is more difficult than I say to stay positive and stay confident regardless of kind of what's going on. But I think that should be the aim. It should be the goal. And if you catch yourself kind of feeling sorry for yourself or feeling like you're doomed, then perhaps you just shouldn't fire tournaments and let yourself just kind of get some rejuvenation and then go back when you're in a better headspace, because I just don't, good things typically just don't happen when you have that defeatist attitude.
And the other thing is that, if you're really feeling defeated like that, then go down a limit or two,
Yeah.
And, I mean, if you're playing cash, you normally play 2-5, go down and play 1-3, but be it fully engaged in it, book a couple of wins and build your confidence back up, and then, get yourself back, in the game. And the same can be true online with tournaments. Like, don't go play the most difficult sites, and, play some of the softer sites, and not the top end of your buy-in, and, book some wins.
Yep, I agree completely. So let's talk about, you mentioned Abe Styles, you mentioned Jordan. What other coaches have you engaged with? What other training tools and materials are you looking at on a routine basis?
Sure. So, I mean, as far as coaching goes, it's right now mainly the coaches that are in BBZ are the main people I'm interacting with. So, Yargo and Brian, we've got a host of, people like Ponditi, and guys that come occasionally, but not all the time. So there's a mental game coach, Hamill, that's part of BBZ, which is great. And then I have my own mental game coaching outside, which is through Elliot or Stephen Baker. And I've been working mainly with Stephen one-on-one, which is very, very helpful. But I do look, I use, as far as tools go, I'm an ambassador for Poker Academy, which I think is fantastic for, they have a lot of post-flop capabilities as well. And I really love the way their ranges are displayed, and their ability to do drilling, which I especially use for pre-flop. And GTO Wizard is also obviously a very, very helpful tool. And
what
then
is Poker Academy? Could you go more in depth?
Sure. Yeah. So Poker Academy, it's kind of interesting because it started out that one of the people who began Poker Academy was in Elevate with and working with us with Ape Styles.
One of the four.
Yeah, one of the small group. But he had come up with this Excel spreadsheet that he had made for having all your ranges really, really handy, where you could just click on versus different race sizes and your responses and all these things. And a bunch of us paid like a ton of money for this spreadsheet because that just wasn't available anywhere in such a usable format. And then ultimately he went on to make it into a site. And so, just every pre-flop spot you can conceive of is there, including, ICM scenarios with 10% of the field left, 50% of the field left, asymmetric ranges with different percents of the field left. And then, you can take those same ranges to study post-flop spots, et cetera, with, any flop and run out that you want. As well. But there's a drilling function where you can just go in and like I said, I have a different set of drills that I do for each day of the week. Looking either just at chip EV, with, raise first in from any position versus raise, first in. So I'll usually look at, cutoff versus raise first in, button versus raise first in, small blind and big blind versus a steal. And you can, just drill those situations daily, and it doesn't take long to do. But, I think a lot of times people end up not doing much in the way of drilling because it feels like, oh, it's too time consuming, or, I'm not sure how to use the software. So having something that's really easy to use, it's very easy to customize drills with people. And I've done that with a couple of students, and just helping them to set up, a way to drill basic things every day. And you can, if you're somebody that has to work a job, there's a lot of things that you can do to get through poker materials, and it doesn't have to be like where I set aside a 3-hour block of time, which a lot of people can't do, but you can do a lot of things, in little dead spaces of time while you're waiting in line at the supermarket, while you're, waiting for your dinner to heat up, or things like that, where you can get through your drills, doing it in little spots here and there to get through material in a day where other people aren't doing that. And they're just like swiping TikTok or whatever.
How many hours a week are you dedicating to studying poker?
Probably 15-ish.
15-ish?
Yeah, I would say. Sometimes a little more, but that's, because you get probably close to 10 hours just in seminars from BBZ alone, and then some other materials. There's a lot of other good, poker sites, that are out there, obviously. So I'll dabble around in some of those, or some of the courses that they've had through BBZ. Like Jordan's Simple Poker Systems is really great for heuristics that you can understand and implement right away. And there's a number of different coaches have had bundles of things, so that stuff's all great to study. But if you add in the time spent doing drills, which is probably another 30 minutes a day, it's pretty easy to get up there.
Nice. 15 seems pretty reasonable, especially given the screen time on our phones regularly. If we
right.
replace that with poker study, then I think we could hit 15 pretty easily, or most people could hit 15
for sure,
fairly easily. So, to kind of close, you're either going to reduce your work heavily or retire. What's next after that?
Yeah. I think I'm not sure entirely what I'm going to be doing once I retire. I'll definitely be playing more poker, going to travel a lot, spend more time with family, and then, explore a lot of other, new interests and things like that, kind of whatever comes my way that I want to explore. I haven't played golf, going to learn how to golf.
Nice.
Nice. And I think just having the freedom to be able to take a course and learn about something new and do some volunteering or things like that. So that's, but certainly playing more poker is going to be pretty high on the list.
Yeah. How does your wife feel playing more poker, more traveling?
She's very supportive as long as the poker doesn't get too out of hand. But she can shift her work around as well. So she may actually do some work on weekends, which then would allow me to either play an online Sunday or play local tournaments or do some traveling to places that are fun for tournaments. Hopefully some places like New Orleans will get their circuit back, because that was a great circuit stop, a really fun city. Mm-hmm. But do some traveling around like that, and so
great.
That'll be great.
Yeah, great to hear. I'm excited to see what happens, and excited for you to be able to spend more time in the poker realm and just find more accolades and put in more volume. I think that's
thanks.
It's exciting. Well, it is been great having you as always. Thank you for your time. Congratulations on your score a couple of years ago, and I'm sure there will be many more scores in the nearish future, or at least many more tournaments well played.
Perfect. That's the way to say it.
Yeah, which is all Brad. I can ask for. My pleasure.
It's always great coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is Chasing Poker Greatness with your host, Brad Wilson. Coach Brad approved. Are you a lone wolf searching for the ultimate pack? The CPG Wolf program is a close-knit brotherhood hell-bent on one thing only: chasing poker greatness. Powered by bleeding-edge wolf strats and led by Coach Brad and his lieutenants, CPG Wolves are systematically prepared for almost any spot they'll encounter on the green felt. If you want to plug into an elite team and have a step-by-step game plan to realize your full poker potential, you can apply at cpgwolves.com. Space is limited, and the pack is only as strong as its weakest member. So only the hungriest, grittiest, and most driven will be accepted into the program. Applications are open at cpgwolves.com.